Hello Ripple folks, this is Ron, or Karma Coverage on the forum, and in lieu of writing this up, I'm going to try and make a video on liquidity within RippleNet. I'd like to go over, starting off, just what does liquidity mean, and I will look at escrowing value on ledgers and how that facilitates liquidity, take a peek at some charts and how to observe the depth of liquidity and liquidity risk. Who provides liquidity, and we'll take a peek at that. And then with that, we'll try to look at liquidity throughout a RippleNet transaction. Of course, some of that's going to touch on XRP ledger liquidity, and some of that is also going to be off-ledger liquidity where you're connecting two ledgers. So what does liquidity mean? It does kind of depend on the context in which you are discussing it. To liquidate an asset generally means to sell it with haste, usually implying a price reduction. That price reduction would be the liquidity risk. For a market to have shallow or deep liquidity, we'll look at the chart on that. Basically, this is going to be a measure of the risk. The deeper the liquidity, the lower the risk. The shallower the liquidity, the more you'll move the price with a big transaction. Liquidity in time, this is very key. Liquidity inherently invokes the prospect or aspect of time. I guess the strict definition is actually how long does it take to convert an asset to cash. So obviously time is implied in there. And speed matters here for a number of reasons. I probably will touch on some and not all. Liquidity risk, so this is the amount you move the price point of the asset you're wanting to liquidate. Think about selling a piece of real estate. Real estate's a market with high liquidity risk, very illiquid market. And so if you need to sell a home very quickly, you're probably going to have tens of thousands or maybe even $100,000 of liquidity risk where you will sell the property for less than its retail value because you just don't have time to wait for a buyer. And then market cap versus liquid market. So to explain this, I use an old analogy of a butter churn. After churning, the butter rises to the top and the milk fills the rest of the churn. So let's say your market cap was a 5-gallon bucket. So you've got 5 gallons of market cap. That's everything in the churn. That's all floated units. For XRP, that'd be whatever the original 100 billion is left. The liquid market is what rises to the top. This is what's actively on the order book for that market, or all order books, really. To give a GE example, let's just say there's 100, or just stick with XRP. So there's 100 billion XRP units. That will be your market cap. Let's just say, 10 billion trade per day. That would be your liquid market. So these are two different metrics you can look at and observe of a market, or characteristics of a market. All right. So with my work on Karma coverage, at one point I realized, these insurance companies are effectively, they're only escrowing money for a purpose. And then when one of the guys left Ripple, I was talking to him in a private message through the forum there, and I was telling, this was around the same time I was realizing this, and I was saying, I think these ledgers as a tool are there to escrow value. In some sense, that's kind of a duh statement, because where else are you going to account for it? Just in your head. That's not very good. And he pushed back and said, no, I think payments are the best application for these distributed ledgers. To which I agreed, but if you don't have any value escrowed on that ledger, specifically XRP ledger, then you can't use that ledger to facilitate value exchange or liquidity, because there's no value to even be liquid. It's like having a plumbing system with no water in it. A lot of good plumbing analogies too, actually, in this. It's interesting they even use words like liquidity and flow and things of that nature. So we have some value escrowed on XRP ledger. This can be obviously XRP. This could also be the IOUs, and which can represent many forms of value, fiat and commodities, whatever. Then we've got banks. And banks are as Chris Larson said back in the day, the custodians of value. And his analogy was that when we created the internet, the universities were the custodians of information. So you needed to network those custodians together, thus an internet of information. And Larson's point there was that banks are the custodians of value. Thus, that's where the value is escrowed. And if you want to create an internet of value, you have to network these custodians or ledgers where that value is held, escrowed. I guess escrow means held through time, but whatever. So then we've got the special guy here, the market maker. They functionally use this tool and order book, which was the last thing I wrote about. And I'll get into them more down here under providers of liquidity, but they actually try to keep as little value escrowed on their ledger as possible. Remember, value is a market maker's inventory. If they want to deploy that inventory, they're actually going to hold it on deposit between the two ledgers that they want to make a market between. Now, depth of liquidity. So we're going to look at some charts and liquidity risk, string a few charts together. I'll try to give a multi-hop example and discuss from a connector's point of view. So if you're the market maker or a connector, same word in ILP, how speed and inventory turnover cycle. I might leave that towards the end. It's a little more sophisticated. But so to look at this is the XRP Bitstamp order book, or market, if you will. An order book is a tool used to make markets. So this is a market. This is XRP Ledger is making this market. So here's all your bids and here's all your asks. This makes up the market depth. When you talk about depth, you're talking about how far down the order book are you going to execute. And if you look at this chart, let's just say you wanted to do a $500,000 trade. I think of this chart as like a bucket. So this is the walls of the bucket, and all of your liquidity rests in this zone. So if you wanted to sell $500,000 of value out of this market, you would start selling. So you would start chipping through these ask prices, which would be pushing the market this way. So if you went to 500,000, that would drive this market somewhere down to like 20 cents or so, a little above 20 cents. So that change in price from whatever it is, 45 to 20, that change in price would be the liquidity risk. It's called 25 cents. If you were selling, so if you were buying and you wanted to buy $500,000 in this market, you would probably move the price to somewhere around 80 cents. So you would not be able to purchase all 500,000 at 45 cents. You'd actually move the price up. So that price movement again would be the liquidity risk. In this case, you're the buyer, so the risk is paying too much. You're driving the price up, and you would do that. You'd almost double the price if you did that. So that is, and keep this bucket analogy in mind. I'm going to pop over to this other thing and see if I can't make a visual of. So if we think of each ledger as a bucket that holds some liquidity, and then we'll draw in our participants. This is going to be a bank ledger, and we're going to have a sender here with a balance of 50, and they would ultimately like to send $10 to this receiver here, who also has a balance of 50 at their bank. And then we're going to have, this will be the XRP ledger in the middle. And then we're going to have these market makers, and I'm going to make their ledger look like an order book. So what we want to do is we want to get value from here to here. We can assume this is different jurisdictions or what have you. It doesn't really matter. And this market maker, let's start both of these guys with 200 in value. and they're going to deploy 100 here and 100 here, and this guy's going to deploy 100 here and 100 here. So we've got a $10 payment we're going to send through. First off, the thing is, these buckets now have 100 of liquidity. So you can move a maximum of $100 in liquidity. So your liquidity depth here would be 100, even though there's actually $400 of value in this system. Actually more, 500, 200, 200, and 100 between these guys. So to make this go, we're going to subtract 10, subtract 10 from the sender. And that is going to give this market maker, one of the interesting things is the money never leaves the ledger, actually, that it's escrowed on. Another kind of interesting thing with the escrow part. So this guy now has 40, and this market maker has a balance of 110 in that ledger. Obviously, the point here is to facilitate a payment all the way through. So this guy now only has $90 on the XRP ledger. And this guy will have received the 10 on that ledger. Now, over here, the market maker is going to make the payment, to the receiver, and so he's going to be down 90 or down $10 on that ledger, and this guy will be 10 plus. So that's basically how that moves. I did not calculate for any spreads. If you were to calculate for spreads, let's just say there was a 50-cent spread on both ends of this trade. What would happen here is this guy would end up with a negative 10 on that side of his order book and a positive 1050. On there, and the same with this, the second market maker here. He would actually end up with, if he collected his fee on the bank side, he would have the same, negative. Well, no, he's actually positive 1050 on the XRP side of his ledger or his order book, and negative 10 on the bank side where he paid out. So in both cases, you've got your outflow and your inflow, and no money has really moved any ledger. This ledger still has the original $150, which would be the 40 from the sender plus the 110 from the market maker. This XRP ledger still has a cumulative $200, and this ledger over here still has its cumulative 90, 50, 90, 60, 150 bucks. So really no money moves. It's an interesting thing coming from ILP. I remember during the when whoever it was that wrote the ILP graveyard write-up, this kind of dawned on me also when I was looking at that. So let's reduce the size of this guy and find out where I'm at here. All right, so we looked at the charts to see liquidity depth. We looked at, I didn't really do a multi-hop. Let's go over here and augment this chart for a multi-hop. Now let's go like this. Let's take this guy. Yeah, I'll erase that. Do that. All right. So let's get our bucket back. Can't hold liquidity with bottomless bucket. And let's actually make, so let's pretend this was that Southeast Asian bank over here. So this is actually a bank in the RippleNet network, and they are going to provide multi-hop. So let's go back to our market makers. So we're going to have a market maker here. We've got our market maker there. Should keep the colors the same. So we've got our market maker here. And the interesting thing with this is now the bank over here, they are running a RippleNet node, so they're running Xcurrent, and they want to provide liquidity as well. So they're going to also run their own order book. Now this is all one entity in the network. The guy, this person is just functioning as dual role. So they're functioning both as a ledger and as a connector in ILP terminology, or a market maker. So how do we set this up? So we've got a sender, we've got a receiver, we've got this guy's got some liquidity there and some liquidity here. Same thing here. But we've got a third ledger here. So we've also got some liquidity escrowed there. And since they are going to act as a market maker, they are going to also have 100 on this ledger and 100 on this ledger. So now what we effectively have is, to get a payment from the sender to the receiver, we have two path options. We can go through the XRP ledger, as the prior example showed, or we can go through the multi-hop operator, the bank. Presumably, I think XRapid is where the pathfinding happens in RippleNet. At this point, what we have to do is find some place where all the information for the costs, i.e. the spreads to go through this path, can be compared to the costs and spreads to go through that path. For the multi-hop bank, obviously they are also a liquidity provider. So they are they're basically not pulling back their Nostro Vostro. This is just another Nostro Vostro type of old example. So that's basically a multi-hop person is just acting as, one, operating a ledger where liquidity can be escrowed within RippleNet. That would be Xcurrent. And two, acting as a market maker additionally. So one unit or one entity within the broader network, as opposed to having the order book operator entity separated from the ledger operator entity. All right, I'm going to skip this one for now. So the providers of liquidity, if we pop back over to this chart, we've got retail traders, market makers on and off ledger, and market makers as a connector cross ledger. So going back to the chart, let's assume this is, I'm going to change that, we'll give it a different title. Let's assume this is an exchange. So this is an exchange, and you've got your retail traders here. So these retail traders are going to make deposits. If you buy something, you got to put money in the account. So they're holding accounts on their ledger, accounting for all of their retail trader balances. since they're running an exchange, they're obviously also running an order book. So that order book can be comparing 2 units of value. So XRP dollars, whatever you want to call it, oranges and apples, doesn't matter. And this order book tool is obviously where 2 things of value get compared or balanced out. And so that would be the retail traders in this trading activity. The amount of activity is going to effectively be you're coming right back to the depth of liquidity chart. I guess we kind of already covered the market makers as connectors cross ledger. So yeah, I mean, it's not even that complicated. What's the next thing here? Okay, liquidity in RippleNet. So who are these entities and sort of what is the nature of each of these? If we pop back over here, the bank ledger, this is where they're providing a tool for escrow. So there's value escrowing here. There really isn't value moving except between traders. Imagine an exchange, Bitstamp. You know, when these order books are going here and the trades are happening, the only thing that's happening is values moving in between these individual traders, all within one ledger. XRP ledger, market makers, cross ledger. Okay, so XRP ledger provides, this is obviously a ledger that's of a different nature, the distributed function or distributed part of it. These guys are just running traditional bank ledgers, and we've got a ledger here from an exchange. I'm not going to dive into why decentralization is important, but this does play a very, very critical role. Also, the speed, if you're trying to knock down liquidity risk, speed is very important. With XRP ledger offering an alternative, because remember, you've got 2 pathways from sender to receiver that now have to compete. So XRP ledger is a new type of connector, market maker. It basically sets the floor on how slow you can go. In a centralized ledgers, these guys should be running way faster than XRP ledger anyway. And the cross-currency or cross-ledger payment, I think I've kind of covered that. An exchange here would probably be the best example of that, because you're allowing the retail investors to just do whatever they're going to do. And so now on ledger liquidity, so payments versus order books, and then the payment channels. So with XRP ledger, you have all of this in one. So within XRP ledger, you can have many order books. And let's say you want to send value through this. You could trade, this would be a multi-hop. You would simply go through multiple order books. So, you know, you could trade USD for XRP on Bitstamp, XRP on Bitstamp for XRP on some other exchange in different country, GateHub, I guess, and then over here you would have GateHub to the pound. So that would be a multi-hop. And this can all, what's so incredible, I guess to me, one of the first things that struck me with the XRP ledger was that all of this is all contained within one ledger. So there's just a whole lot of things you can do with that. And on ledger, the pathfinding algorithm will automatically solve this. Which path should we take? Is it faster to go down this path or faster to go down this path? And that's incredible, but where ILP comes in and where I'm still fuzzy on some of this, although I think it's happening in XRapid, is I think that this path, when you go off ledger, you can't rely on XRP ledger's pathfinding capacity to find the best path between these order books. So to find that path, you have to look at the off ledger activity. Off ledger, we have the exchanges, so I can use that, ILP connector, RippleNet multi-hop. Kind of covered that already, but I will just touch on it one more time. So this would be your ILP transaction. The trouble is, and the only way to really know, and someone ought to do this at some point, is let's say we have another one of these off-ledger connector situations where we've got someone running a ledger and an order book. And they might be going to all three. So now that they have value on 3 ledgers, we're going to have to, this guy is going to have this, we'll call him an ILP connector. And he might have 4 markets, but he's got 3 markets for now. So we'll call this one number 1, number 2, and number 3. And hey, let's do this. And he's got an account with this exchange. So now he's got, well, it actually goes exponential, but so he's got, let's call this one 1 and 2, this one 2 and 3, this one 4 and 3, this one would be 3 and 1, this would be, you got to make each pair. I'm not going to go through all of it, but you get the point. The key thing is this connector can run his own pathfinding or arbitrage formulas across all the different markets that he can make. And that you get paid for that. So doing the routing, doing the arbitrage, finding and minimizing those spreads through taking those arbitrage opportunities, it's an important function in the market that speculators typically play in your more developed markets, but in this market, that pathfinding function is going to be over here. And this could be a multi-hop bank too. The one in Southeast Asia, just consider each one of these a Nostro-Vostro account, plus they've got their XRP ledger, so they can make a market and do all of that between there. And I think that about wraps it up. So there is a difference between RippleNet and the broader Internet of Value. I don't think RippleNet necessarily includes other crypto ledgers like Bitcoin or Ethereum. It can, certainly, through IOUs on the XRP ledger, but I consider RippleNet to be more people who have signed up, i.e. exchanges and banks and whatnot. And then to measure total liquidity in RippleNet, really only Ripple, I think, can do this, if they can even do it. You've got to sum up all exchanges here where XRP is traded, if you're looking at XRP liquidity, I guess. And I don't know where anyone's done that yet, so there's a project for somebody. If there's any questions on this, I hope I wasn't too terribly boring, and I'll post this on the forum there and ask a question. I'll see if I can't answer it. Appreciate you watching, and have a good one.